Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for day number 2 of the World's 2024 Quarterfinals. It is our second quarterfinals matchup, obviously here on day number 2. If you want to know what happened on day 1 between LNG and Weibo Gaming, you can check out the video up in the iCard. Of course, up there is going to be the entire Worlds playlist as well. We've covered every single game at Worlds so far, play-ins, main stage, all of that stuff. It's all been covered on the channel, so check out how we got to this point if you are interested. Of course, we've also covered all 4 of the major regions throughout this entire year. That does, of course, include the 2 teams that are playing today. We've covered every single game that they have played, so if you want to check any of that out, you can go ahead and check that out on the channel. But today, we have probably the most intriguing quarterfinal matchup that we are going to get the entirety of the tournament. It's the number 1 seeds from the 2 best regions in the world, and so I'm super excited to get into it. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What did you think was going to happen in this series, and did it live up to your expectations? As you guys know, I'm recording this as the series is going on, and so I don't have any spoilers as I'm recording this. I'm very, very intrigued to see where it goes. These are 2 of the top 3 teams at this tournament, in my opinion, and one of them will be out in the quarterfinals. It's a brutal draw, but it's just the way the cookie crumbles every once in a while. But without further ado, let's get into it. I don't want to waste you guys' time too much. If you are new here, what we are going to do in this video is go game by game in this series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dead of the game for each individual game, and of course, at the end of the series, I will be giving a player of the series to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will quickly, once again, preview tomorrow's quarterfinal, but if you want a more in-depth, detailed breakdown of my entire thoughts on the bracket, you can go ahead and check out the final day of the Swiss stage, day number 9. That's where I did kind of my full preview and expectations for the bracket in general. So check that out if you're interested, but again, we will be talking about tomorrow's game, or tomorrow's series as well at the end of the video. But we got to get to today's series first, because this is really the one to look out for. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest series of the entire tournament. I think this could very easily decide who ends up going to World Finals. Hell, this series could decide who ends up winning World Finals if everything goes right for one of these 2 teams. Like I said, it is the number 1 seed from the LCK in Hanwha Life Esports taking on the number 1 seed from the LPL in Bilibili Gaming. The fact that one of these 2 teams is guaranteed to be out in top 8 to not make top 4 is genuinely ridiculous in terms of pre-tournament expectations, but that's what happens if you're BLG and you end up underperforming in the Swiss stage. This is the consequence for that, and I think that there were a lot of reasons that this team ended up underperforming a bit in the Swiss stage. I think when you look at some of their drafts, I think that's probably the clearest way to identify some of the problems for BLG. They just had a really bad meta read at the start of this tournament. They didn't really feel all that comfortable playing the things that everybody else was playing to great success. We saw that specifically in the matchup against LNG, where they just really weren't able to get the ball rolling in the same kind of way that LNG was, and that's what caused that gigantic upset that nobody really saw coming. I think BLG absolutely has rebounded. I think they've gotten a better understanding of the meta. I think they've started to adapt and started to play through the middle of the map more, which has definitely made them a bit more consistent in this current meta. But you're looking at a couple of players that are going to be integral and very influential on this series as a whole. Obviously, a lot of eyes are going to be directed at Shun in the jungle. He came in mid-tournament. Wei was benched. A lot of people were upset about this decision. I was pretty neutral about it. I think that they are very different players in terms of playstyle, and honestly, skill-wise, I think it's pretty comparable. I think it's just up to which playstyle you would prefer to have in any particular instance. I think Wei is going to give you a higher floor, lower ceiling, and I think Shun is going to give you a lower floor, higher ceiling. Like, you're going to be a bit more unpredictable with Shun because he's just better mechanically than someone like Wei, but he's also going to make way more mistakes because mentally he's not quite as consistent. Now, that's going to help you beat these better teams. Like, I don't know if I would consider BLG as scary against a team like HLE with Wei as I would with Shun, because I just don't know if the upside is as much there. BLG is much more calm and controlled, and I don't know if that's a style that's going to work necessarily against HLE, but Shun is also the kind of player that can actively just straight up lose you a series like this, and so it's going to be important to keep an eye on him, especially going into someone like Peanut, who's very good at being able to capitalize on very aggressive players. But we'll get to Peanut. He has his own history in terms of playing in the quarterfinals. I think the other player for me on BLG that you really have to talk about before this series is On, because I think he has really not been here so far this tournament. I think there have been a lot of supports that have stepped up and been really good. A lot of them aren't being talked about all that much on the broadcast. Thank you so much, broadcast, for giving giving me a niche in my channel, being able to actually highlight the players that are playing well at this tournament, but On has really not been one of them. He has not been particularly good for BLG. He's been caught out a lot more than you would want to see, and honestly, this kind of does reflect how he was playing towards the back half of the year in the LPL. Even in their wins in the playoffs, he was just way too reckless in terms of his positioning. He's really taking the LPL Hillisang moniker to heart, and that's really not what you want to see. This is way less consistent than what he was last year, and I think we've kind of just seen that over the course of this whole year, and generally that's frustrating because I think Elk has been tremendous. I think even without resources, the guy has been pretty exceptional. He's not quite been the standout at this tournament, but he was my LPL MVP. I really do think that he was the best AD carry in the LPL, and I think he was the most valuable player on BLG for most of this split, and I really do think that if you give him resources, he can do well. I think you arguably have the two most talented AD carries in the world in this series. You have Bin on the top side. He should be a pretty big strength. Knight is going to be hopefully a strength in the mid lane. I feel good about the rest of this BLG roster, but if the ancillary pieces, the more facilitative pieces can really step up and kind of lock in like Shun, like On, I think that that's going to make it very difficult for HLE to be able to win, but it's not like HLE don't have experience going up against some of the best teams in the world. This is a team that not only beat Gen.G in the finals, obviously we've talked about that before, but they honestly pushed them really hard earlier on in this tournament already, and so you feel pretty good about HLE's performances. I think that this team has looked about as good as you could have wanted them to look. I think Zeka has had a really good World Championship so far in the mid lane, and obviously this is a player who has a track record of stepping up the more clutch the situation is, whether that be both domestic and international, and so you're expecting him to do well, but Zeka and Knight is obviously one of the big matchups to watch. Already talked a bit about it, but Peanut's actually really good domestically, punishing these really over-aggressive junglers. We've mostly seen it with Owner, who is a miserable player into Peanut. It's been like a disaster over the course of Owner's career. That's easily his worst matchup, and I would say Owner and Shun actually have some similarities. I don't think they're exactly the same player, but I do think that they play in a similar style, and Peanut might be very comfortable trying to play into that if Shun is able to kind of take his foot off the gas a little bit and try to match Peanut's tempo in the mid game. That actually would be more of a positive in my opinion for BLG, because then you get the crazy team fighting of Shun that he's able to put out when he's in good spots, but not necessarily the flippy nature in the mid game. We'll see though. Peanut's really good at taking advantage of bad early games, and that's kind of what he's done the entire tournament. This guy's had like a 30-40 CS lead every single game that he's played. Viper is also the player, of course, you have to watch here. Viper and Elk, like I said, one of the most intriguing matchups you can get in terms of the AD carries at this tournament. It's talent galore. Every single position, everywhere. It's like not like Delight and Doran are pushovers by any means. I've been singing their praises all year long as well. This is just a ridiculous matchup. These are 10 of the best players in the world in this, and unfortunately 5 of them are going to be going home after today. But the only way to know which team is going to end up coming out on top is, of course, to go game by game. So let's get into it. The winner of game number 1 was Hanwha Life Esports. They are going to take game number 1. They're going to go up in this series 1-0, and this is basically exactly what you would want to see from HLE in game number 1. This was the best game of the tournament, in my opinion. I think you can look at almost any other game that almost any other team has played throughout this entire tournament. I don't know if you're going to see better execution than what we just saw out of Hanwha Life. This wasn't even a bad game at all by Bilibili. They were losing in terms of kills. They were kind of getting beaten all over the map, and you look at the gold, and it's basically entirely even. Shun was doing a great job of actually keeping the team in the game in terms of the macro and overall momentum of the game, and I think the rest of the team was doing an okay job of following up. Bin was trying to stay relevant on the top side, and eventually on the bot side just trying to match Doran split push. You had players like Knight that were at least attempting to make a lot of these, interesting plays, but when you look at HLE's comp, they're just way too mobile. It's really hard to stick onto any of these members, specifically the Ezreal, who is really the only priority target you can go on. I mean, look at HLE's comp. If you're Vi, Ahri, who are you diving after Ezreal in this comp? You can't dive Gnar, you can't dive Silas, you can't dive Poppy, and so you don't really have any good targets if you're not landing onto the Ezreal, and you can't actually land and stick onto the Ezreal, and so it actually becomes a very difficult comp to end up playing out if you don't have that early game lead. I do think you eventually hit this break point where like Rumble and Misfortune and Rel make it a lot easier to end up 5v5ing, but for HLE, they just played out these fights so perfectly. Peanut was excellent this game, but really player of the game, it's not up for debate for me. It's got to go to Zeka. We'll talk about both Peanut and Viper Viper, who I think definitely get honorable mentions for player of the game here, but Zeka was the one that was creating most of the action for this team when you're looking at the spacing and when you're looking at why BLG had to respect a lot of that damage so much, why they had to play so far back and not really contest a lot of these objectives when they kind of needed to. Almost 100% of the time, it is Zeka like single-handedly zoning them out of a lot of these instances. He's just so ridiculously good at Sylas. It is so greedy to pick B1 Sylas. There are so many ways to counter it, but they understand that leaving Ahri up is going to tempt BLG too much to pick the Vi Ahri combo, and that's exactly what they do. They want to default them to the things that they are comfortable on, and they know that they feel good about Sylas into that matchup. We saw that with the Ahri ultimate, with the Spirit Rush, that there's basically no way to actually catch the Sylas in any situation. He can dash in and out and up and down and all over the place. He's got 55 dashing abilities throughout this game, and obviously Zeka's really good when he has that level of mobility and has that level of agency, and this is obviously one of his best champions. I will say I'm getting a little bit frustrated with the broadcast. I'm not trying to call anybody out in particular, but I don't understand where this narrative that, oh, Zeka has finally figured it out has come from. This guy's been an all-pro for 3 straight years in the LCK. 2022, he was really good throughout the entirety of the summer split. It wasn't just Worlds, and I was talking about that. That's kind of what propped my channel up and got me popular in the first place, and so, it was good to see Zeka actually live up to my pre-tournament expectations at Worlds that year. Last year, he was one of the only pieces of this HLE team that was actually trying to win. Viper was not nearly as 1v9 as people were talking about. It was much more of a 2v8. As I said a lot on my channel, Zeka was a borderline all-pro guy up there with, the big 4, the big 5 in the mid lane in the LCK. And then this year, he's undoubtedly been a top 2, top 3 mid laner in the LCK. I don't understand where this narrative is coming from that, oh, Zeka is finally coming alive because it's Worlds. This guy is just a good player. It's not some sort of miracle buff. He obviously does get better in clutch situations, but this isn't out of the realm of possibility. He had games like this domestically, a lot of them, and so I'm just getting a little bit frustrated with how much this guy seems to be disrespected by basically every caster, including the LCK ones, mind you. Like, Atlas and Chronicler are very much on the, oh, Zeka actually isn't all that good train, and I just don't understand it. Like, someone has to explain it, because he does this all the time. I've covered the LCK every single game, and so have they, so I don't know what they're not seeing, but it is what it is. Zeka continues to perform well. A lot of people are going to look at Viper. The Ezreal game's relatively easy here. I know that feels weird to talk about when I kind of really went into Vi and Ahri basically only having one target, but Ezreal, all he has to do is get off of the initial engage. As long as he's not hit by the Vi and the Ahri and not, CC chained into oblivion, he can basically free fire on the backline because they have to deal with the Gnar, they have to deal with the Sylas, they have to deal with the Poppy. You don't really have time to deal with the Ezreal if you don't land the initial engage on him, and so Viper just gets to do a ton of free damage throughout this game. I thought Delight was incredible. A couple of those pulverizes were genuinely unbelievable. He has been great over the course of this year. Peanut had a ridiculously good fight around the first Baron and ended up basically securing it for free and getting the team out on his own. Doran was really consistent in terms of being able to frontline this game. This was just about as perfect of a game as you could play for HLE. I really can't sing the praises of this team enough. I think this was the single best game played at Worlds so far, and if they can keep that up, it's not even going to be close. And that's, talking about BLG playing well, that's how good HLE is. BLG actually did a lot of interesting things. Like I said, I really like the way Shun played the map here. He was able to keep the gold lead from spiraling out of control, even without being able to find picks, which normally shouldn't really happen with this comp. I just think he did such a good job of making sure that he himself and Knight also had a lot of gold throughout the mid game, and again, they had an opportunity. They just weren't able to win any of the fights, which it is what it is, right? Like, HLE played perfect and BLG didn't play perfect. They just played really well. Dud of the game for me is going to go to On. It really didn't feel like any of the Rel engages were all that influential throughout this game. I know, again, it's kind of hard to play Rel, but you pick that to Wombo with the Rumble, and you pick it to Wombo with the Misfortune, and to try to set up some of these 5v5 outs in team fights as an engaged threat, and it just never really came to fruition. You had opportunities, but it just never was there. He also got juked out a couple of major times by both Delight and Peanut. Really not a great look for On. Again, I just need him to be better. He's got to be an elite level support to keep up in a series like this, but even players like Knight, like, just not enough damage. I don't think, as much as I love Knight's Ahri, I think if you're going to pick it, you need to have something other than Misfortune down in the bot lane. You need to have something that can hyper carry. We've seen this really regularly throughout this tournament. Now, something like the Rumble on the top side definitely helps for that, but Bin never really had the opportunity to take over in these fights because he couldn't get nearly enough gold inside lanes to answer the Sylas. And so overall for BLG, like, you have a plan here. I just don't know if it's necessarily the one that I would be going towards. And even if you did play well, you're playing one of the best teams in the world. You can't just be great. You have to be perfect. And unfortunately in game one they weren't. But HLE was The problem is they have to keep it up. BLG is not going to take their foot off the gas. HLE is certainly not going to want to either. But game 2, mega important now. If HLE can get that 2-0 lead, it's going to look pretty dire for the number 1 seed from the LPL. But are they going to be able to do that? Or is Bilibili going to be able to answer back and tie up this series at 1 apiece? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to even up the series at 1 apiece. And wow, this was definitely a rebound here for BLG. This is not necessarily the game I was expecting from them, but this is certainly a movement in a positive direction for BLG, and so you have to commend them on that. For HLE, I'm not really sure what ended up happening. It feels like Red Side just mind controls people in draft right now. I really cannot fathom what is happening. This is one of the worst drafts of the entire tournament, and coming off of a game that you basically just completely outplayed BLG in. I don't understand why you are giving them so many options to just not even have to outplay you in this game. It just feels like such a bad decision, and generally they were punished incredibly hard for it. We'll talk a bit more about it, but BLG kind of getting, I'm not going to say the Exodia comp, because to me, like, when you think of the strongest comp in the game right now, I think of 4 champions, I think of Jax, I think of Sedge, I think of Yone, I think of Ezreal. I think that is the best comp you can get in the game. We saw that yesterday when LNG was basically gifted a free win in game number 2, regardless of how poor they played in that game. But you know, this is pretty close. The Rumble actually complements the Yone incredibly well. Not only can it function pretty well in the early game to be able to draw attention to the top side, but obviously it pairs really well with the Yone in terms of comboing ultimates in the back half of the game. It also is, of course, the AP to his AD, which is always a good substitute. I mean, Sedge Yone is incredibly broken, and to be able to get it is ridiculous, but Xayah kind of fills a pseudo Ezreal role. I don't think that she's quite as good because she doesn't have quite as much agency. I don't think her damage is quite as high as something like an Ezreal in terms of consistency, but again, kind of a similar idea. And so you're looking at this for BLG and you're saying this is about as good of a blue side comp as you could reasonably expect in this current meta, and you're looking at what HLE traded it for. Well, Skarner Ahri, like, okay. This is so strange to me. I mean, genuinely, this is one of the weirdest draft ideas. Like, I honestly can't even criticize it because clearly they had some sort of idea that no other team in the world is possibly thinking of. Banning out Aurora and leaving up Yone just doesn't make any sense in my brain, and obviously didn't make sense in terms of gameplay either. And again, they were really punished for it. I'm gonna say it, like, Ahri just is not doing it at this tournament. Like, she does no damage, at least in comparison to, like, the big broken threats at Worlds right now. She just doesn't do nearly enough to justify prioritizing her over a lot of these other mid laners, and specifically being like the only priority mid laner that some teams are going to be going for. I get that she has agency, but I'm not an Ahri believer. I really was going into the tournament. I have been, you know, completely converted against Ahri as we've watched more and more games. But for BLG, player of the game kind of has to go to Bin. Giga Bin on the top side, an absolutely brutal laning phase for Doran. So many resources were invested into the top side by Hanwha Life, and they got absolutely nothing out of it, and then Bin ended up winning anyways. Ends up getting, I believe, a solo kill onto Doran. If it wasn't a solo kill, it was certainly not a particularly assisted kill. He ends up winning a 2v1 later on in the game. Zeka has to burn flash to even be able to pick him up in terms of a kill later on. Like, it's just not good for HLE, and Bin is the biggest reason for that. This is not something that should go this way. Gnar, in my opinion, is a pretty heavy counter to Rumble. I think a lot of people would agree on that, and so it's just not good when you see a situation where Bin is able to obliterate Doran when Doran has resources and it's a good matchup for him. Just doesn't feel like a particularly successful laning phase, and Doran will have games like that every once in a while, but Bin definitely deserves a lot of the credit for it. Obviously, people are going to point out Knight on the Yone as well. He was exceptionally good in a lot of these fights. A lot of those ultimates were absolutely ginormous, and honestly, the scoreline doesn't tell the tale of just how relevant he was throughout this game when you give one of the, you know, 1A, 1B types of players the best champion in the game. Who would have thought that in some of the team fights, he's just going to go absolutely nuclear and, like, completely win on his own? Who would have seen that coming? It was completely unbelievable. Shun also was excellent here. I think he's had a really good first 2 games. I think he's arguably been the most consistent player so far through the beginning part of this series, and this Sejuani game was just another good example of him constantly looking for angles and being able to identify how to get his carries into good spots. He's just been really, really good so far. Elk had to play for his life the entire game. HLE clearly identified that getting onto the Xayah was really the only anyway that they were going to win some fights. Viper did a good job, we'll get to that, but Elk was really mostly just trying to survive in a lot of these instances with ult, and On was pretty good as well. A couple of really, really good charms throughout this game, but for BLG, it's just getting on the board. You're not going to get a comp like this likely for the rest of this series, and so taking advantage of it when you do get it is important. And then for HLE, again, I mean, this is just a mega draft diff. I don't really understand what was going through their brain. They completely AFK'd and lost themselves the game, but it's just game 2. You don't want to freak out too much. Like we already said, Doran is going to get dud of the game here. Just got completely abused on the top side of this map. He's going to have games like this every so often. 90%, 95% of his games are really good. Those other 5 to 10% are pretty awful, and so you just kind of have to live with it. This was one of the bad ones. I also do think that Zeka needed to be better. Like, he just wasn't doing any damage. He was landing charms, and he was trying to set up his teammates, and when you look at Viper's, damage, a lot of it was actually set up by Zeka charms, but man, Ahri just does nothing in the late game if she doesn't have gold. It is actually pathetic, and so I really am not a big fan of this champion right now. I think you need something that can be a bit more consistent regardless of what the game state is. You're relying way too much on winning early here, in my opinion. I think also Skarner should not be here's my thing. I want to talk about this because I don't understand. So you ban Skarner on blue side game number 1, which to me indicates that either you don't think it's strong enough to be 1, which, whatever, I don't hate that take, while, of course, also believing that, you don't want to, leave it up for red side. Like, it's strong enough where you don't want to leave it up for red, but not strong enough to be 1. Okay, whatever. But then here in game number 2, you ban out Aurora, and you're happy to trade Yone for Skarner, the best champ in the game. And so, what is it? Like, do you like Skarner? Do you not like Skarner? I just can't really seem to understand. Like, it's just so strange. Like, this doesn't feel like a normal draft. It doesn't even really feel like it was building upon anything that HLE established earlier on, and so it's strange. Viper was unbelievable, though, and I think if you're looking for positives, Viper was really good. I think, obviously, diving onto the backline, being able to pick up some kills, you're very happy about that. He was the better AD carry in this game, and if that carries over to the rest of the series, and there are going to be more options, because, again, you're not going to draft yourself into this situation again, or at least I can't imagine that you would. I think Peanut and Delight were also pretty solid here. Delight actually had some fantastic engages on the Alistair. It was just too little too late. He couldn't actually have any, there was no damage to follow up, I guess is really the only thing to say. Peanut, again, also with some really nice follow-up, especially later on in fights as they became more extended, just not really a lot to be able to do. I also want to point out that Doran had a pretty major fight around one of the Infernal Dragons, but again, there's really just not a lot to be able to do when you put yourself down 9,000 gold going into 20 minutes, and so it is what it is for HLE. I don't think they're going to be putting themselves in this position again when it comes to their drafts, but if they do, like, that's on them. Like, this was their loss, and it was their fault, and BLG did a good job of capitalizing on the really good comp that they were given. I think there were weaknesses in Bilibili's comp, most notably being able to take advantage of topside early, and they just weren't able to do that because Bin was too good, and that shows that BLG is still in a position to be able to contest HLE well. So it's going to be interesting moving into the second half of this series. We're going into Game 3, and as you guys know, I think Game 3 is the most important game of the series when you are tied up at 1 apiece. I think getting that momentum, only having to win one of the final 2 games, it's a really big advantage for whichever team is going to be able to get it. So who's it going to be? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take game number 3. They're going to go up for the first time in this series 2-1, and they have put Hanwha Life on series point. This was another really good showing from BLG. They are showing basically exactly what they have shown all year long, which is resilience. It's the ability to make sure that they maintain their composure. It's the understanding that one game is not the end of the world, and it's this idea that they can adapt their strategies throughout these big series. They've been so good in best of 5s throughout the entire year against everyone that they've gone up against, and that is absolutely translated here to the world stage. For Hanwha Life, you are really, really freaking out right now. Obviously, you really don't want to lose this one. That would be a bit of a disaster as the number 1 seed from the LCK, but going into this tournament, you were projected to be worse than Bilibili Gaming. I don't think it would be like the worst, most era-defining loss in the universe. You're not looking at HLE as massive disappointments for losing this. You are going to be looking at them as massive disappointments if they lose this way again, because right now BLG is just straight up outplaying them in a lot of instances. I think, the drafts have really not been good. I really do not like HLE's strategy, and I think they've been punished for it. They have lost, I would say, say a game and a half off of their drafts. I don't think game number 3 was like lost in draft. I think that there are winning avenues here for HLE. You have places to be able to play through, but I think they continue to make some mistakes and just identify that certain comps are just way, they think certain comps are way better than they actually are. I think that is the truth of it. Ari continues to look entirely useless in games like this, and we'll talk about that as we continue to move along, but player of the game is once again going to go to Bin. How could it possibly go to anybody else? This guy is just absolutely phenomenal. He has reiterated over and over and over again that he is the best top laner in the world. I feel really good about having that be my January take. I don't think that would have been like all that controversial. I'm sure people now are like, obviously Bin's the best top laner in the world, and he was the best top laner in the world going into the year, but go look at the comment sections of my videos where I called Bin the best top laner in the world in January, in December of last year. People were not particularly happy with that take, and so I feel like it's aged relatively well. This guy just continues to massacre everybody that he goes up against. Doran in particular has had a really, really hard time playing into Bin, like, over his entire career. Go look at last year in the quarterfinals when Gen.G ended up playing BLG. He really struggled in that series, was not particularly good. Bin took advantage of him, and we're kind of seeing a similar thing in this series. It's just not really been a good historical matchup for Doran, and even with Doran getting the Jax, which has been by far the most broken top laner in the game throughout the entirety of this tournament, there's just really no way to salvage getting outplayed, and that's kind of what this was. The team fights were actually pretty good from Doran. If he wasn't down 3,000 gold on his lane opposition, then I think this would have actually been a pretty okay game for HLE to be able to play out, but Doran was so far behind individually in terms of gold that there was no way that they were ever going to be able to team fight, and a lot of that was Bin who's going to get that player of the game. Knight obviously deserves another big shout out here, this time on the Sylas. He takes that away from Zeka. I think people forget Zeka is obviously a great Sylas. Knight is arguably a better Sylas. Like, these are the two best Sylas players in the world, and to see them go up against each other, both pulling out that champion blind pick throughout this series, both of them being answered by Ari, who just kind of wins early and then is a less useful version of Sylas as the game continues to go along, is ridiculous, and I think it's obviously a testament to how these teams just don't really have an answer to this champion at the current moment, but Knight absolutely took over some of these late game team fights with his incredible mobility in a very similar way to what Zeka did in game number 1. Jun continues to be excellent in this series. Peanut's not playing bad at all. In fact, I think Peanut has been one of the better players on HLE. I think it's been Peanut. I think it's been, Viper through the first 2 games. We'll talk about the Zeri here, and it's been Delight, in my opinion, that have really, stepped up and been the guys for HLE. But Shun has been unbelievably good. I think if there were any doubters in terms of whether or not Shun could perform at a high level, you're watching him go up against Hanwha Life, up against Peanut, and up against, Viper and Delight and Doran and Zeka and these great players, and you're seeing him be one of the best players on the Rift. This is confirmation that he is a world-class jungler, which is something we already knew, but it's really good to see it again. Elk and On were pretty good in this game. Elk continues to kind of be more of a secondary piece this series. I think that's fine if that's the direction that your team wants to head in, and On has been a really flashy engager. He's actually done a great job at keeping his carries safe, mostly as the Rakan, which is funny, because typically speaking, you would expect a different, role for On, and a different role for him specifically on the Rakan, but overall, BLG is just playing great. This is kind of what we talked about. They were really good in game number 1. It's just that HLE was perfect. They've not been perfect over games 2 and 3, and BLG has kept up their really good pace, and now they're sitting here with a 2-1 lead, and they're 1 game away from making the semifinals against a team in Weibo that they've already beaten multiple times this year. And then for HLE on the other side, like, it's starting to become a little bit scary. Obviously, this team wants to be able to not only make the semifinals, this team wants to win Worlds. Like, they want to be able to compete at the top level. That's what this roster was put together to do, and they won the LCK. They proved that at their best, they could compete with the best, and unfortunately, right now, it's just not all coming together. Doran has been pretty horrific in the second half of this series, or games 2 and 3, I should say, so far. He's gonna get done of the game here. He was down 3,000 gold going into most of these fights, and yet he was still incredibly relevant. That's how good Jax is as a champion right now. If Doran had been even remotely even, I actually think this game is super playable for HLE and super winnable, but it wasn't, because he wasn't in a good position. I think Viper is going to get bailed out super heavily for his performance here today. This is one of those games that I think, because people like Viper, they're going to defend. This was not a good game from Viper. He was so far down in the early game. He ego picks a Zeri that is just not remotely playable right now, in my opinion. I think Zeri's fine individually, but there are so many champions that do what she does better. I don't understand how you could ever pick Zeri over Jinx right now. I think it's just complete ego to do so, and Viper was not useful in the early game. He ends up up just sitting in a side lane collecting CS the entire game, was never really able to do damage in the way that you would want in these fights. I think the damage numbers are going to be pretty inflated just generally because of the trading in the lane patterns and just generally how lane swaps have ended up going. It's why AD carries are so high on the damage charts even when they're not doing all that much in the games throughout this entire tournament. Like, this was not a good game from Viper. Clearly his worst game of the series up until this point. You've got to get him off. This Zeri, you've got to do something else. Like, this is not good enough. Delight has been really good on the Rel. I think Peanut was really good for most of this game on the Nocturne, constantly looking for good plays. People are going to point out the time that he got caught at the end of the game here that ended up sealing it, but honestly, that's a fantastic fight for HLE. They're just down 8,000 gold. Like, you know, I hate to say it, like, in most instances, you want him to be in that position and you want him to force that fight. You want BLG to overextend. We saw it. Like, you know, HLE was able to pick up a couple of kills in that circumstance. They just didn't actually have the gold to be able to do anything about it. And so overall for HLE, the problem is just that it seems they're not identifying their own strengths. They're on blue side and they're banning out things like Skarner that they were happy to trade for Yone on red side. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't really think this team has a clear strategy and they're being taken advantage of for it. Also, Doran is just not playing well enough right now. If this team wants any chance of winning, Doran has to at the very least survive against Bin, which has just not happened over the first, you know, 2 wins here in this series for BLG, but it is tournament life on the line. It's series point here for HLE. If they end up losing this game number 4, they are eliminated from Worlds in the quarterfinals, which would be a massive disappointment, but BLG want to make that happen. They want to prove that they were just warming up in Swiss. They just wanted to get a handle on the meta. They wanted to be able to react and adapt and get into the best of 5 stages where they've always been the best, even going back to last year. So is BLG going to be able to close it out, or is HLE going to push us to a game number 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Bilibili Gaming. They are going to take game number 4. They are going to take this series 3-1, and oh my god, like, I'm hyperventilating coming off of this game number 4. I know basically everybody who watches the big Worlds videos has seen the games or at least knows the results of the games, but if you haven't watched this for some reason, please go and watch this. I do this often domestically because I know a lot of the people who watch my channel in the long term, they don't watch a lot of the games. They come to my channel to get updates on how teams are doing domestically, but you know, if you for some reason haven't watched this game number 4, I am begging you to please go and watch this. This is genuinely one of the best games of all time. I think I'm pretty confident in saying that. This is one of the like Worlds games that I will remember. This series in general, it's funny, I tweeted this at the beginning of the day before any of the games started. This series on paper reminded me a lot of KT versus Invictus in 2018, where it's like 2 teams that are tournament favorites having to face off in the quarterfinals, and one of them's just gonna feel pretty unlucky to be hard done by the other. That obviously was the case here, and once again, it's the Korean team that ends up drawing the short end of the stick with Bilibili winning, but it's more true than you would think, not from the base race perspective, but just with how back and forth and how close this series was, and the fact that these two clearly showed that they are 2 of the best teams in the world. I feel very confident in Bilibili coming out of this series, but honestly, like, if BLG goes out and destroys Weibo, then I think we can officially say that HLE was a, like, Worlds winning type of team, because this was a Worlds winning type of performance from them. BLG was just better. Like, Elk was the best player on the Rift, and you just kind of have to live with that. He's gonna get player of the game here in game number 4. How could you possibly give it to anybody else? This is genuinely one of the best games I've ever seen someone play. This was as perfect of a Kaisa game as has ever been played, you know, in League of Legends. I mean, truly, you can't ask for anything more from a player than what Elk offered you in game number 4, and golly, do I feel pretty vindicated calling him my number 180 carry in the world coming into this tournament. I honestly wasn't sure how that take was going to age, especially because BLG has kind of stopped playing towards him, especially with Wei in. With Shun back in, I was kind of expecting more bot lane pressure, but in this game, you can see they go for the Kindred, they go for the Galio, they want to play for Shun, they want to get him on something comfortable, they want to play a style that they couldn't play with Wei in the team, and you know what? It was the double AD carries that ended up really shining here. Elk was just ridiculous. I mean, truly, there's nothing else to say. Go watch these team fights if you want to learn how to play AD carry at a masterful level. He is dodging everything, the mechanics are perfect, the timing on his ultimates to be able to dive the backline, it's perfect. He's able to 1v3 3 in a lot of circumstances. It's genuinely insane how good he was. And if you ever needed a game, if Elk ever needed a one game or one series to solidify his legacy as like one of the better AD carries right now in the world, this was absolutely it. This is a star-making performance, a top 5 player in the world making performance, and I'm really happy to see it come, in such a pivotal moment. I think you also, of course, have to talk about Shun in the jungle. How could you possibly mention anyone else first? This is, a comp entirely built around his style, one of his signature picks in the Kindred. They pick the Kindred Galio into the Sylas. You are betting that you are going to be able to utilize your own ultimates better than they are going to be able to utilize them. And you know what? You were absolutely right. In this game, Shun was able to completely take over. Some of the positioning balancing that he was doing in these fights was extraordinary. Bin, obviously, with a really good series, and he's going to get player of the series as a whole for me because they're not in this position if Bin doesn't completely obliterate Doran in most of the games leading into this. We'll get into Doran in a second, but, Bin dove a little bit too far in a couple of these fights. It wasn't perfect from him. He was a big reason why HLE actually had moments where they were able to get back, but then you watch the big fight that swings it back in favor of BLG, and who is the one disrupting every single person on the backline? It's Bin, and it's ridiculous. It's so crazy how consistent he is at being able to take over these games. You have On with like a ton of perfect engages, and HLE having to burn everything just to make sure the Rakan doesn't take over the game. It's genuinely a masterclass, and I do have to give a dud of the game, and somehow, some way, it's gonna land on Knight. That doesn't feel right because he was so important in the back half of this game, but genuinely, nobody here deserves dud of the game. I'm only giving it to Knight because he kind of struggled in the mid game, and honestly, when you look at the fight that probably should have sealed the game for HLE, that beautiful Baron that they were able to fight out, that was Knight not really being as useful as maybe you would want on the Galio. That's genuinely the only thing that I have going for him. I think everybody else on this game was making game-winning plays really regularly for their team, but again, if you want to just assume that there's no red bar anywhere on this screen, do that. There doesn't have to be a dud of the game in your eyes. I have to give one because I've established that format, and I've established that I have to do that every game, but I mean, come on, like the Galio was integral towards this comp succeeding. I just think I was a little bit concerned about his positioning at times, and honestly, Zeka being able to steal that ultimate was super valuable for HLE throughout this game, but still, it's not like he was horrible. It's not like he was bad even. He was so good. It's just everybody was so good. Bilibili was so good, and boy, do they deserve to be moving on to the semifinals. This is absolutely a team that can win the World Championships. And then for HLE on the other side, I feel so bad for them. Honestly, it's hard to be like, oh my god, like they have to be crazy upset and crazy disappointed. I'm sure they are. They were the #1 seed from the LCK, but if you would have told me that, a couple of months ago, like even just a month ago, like right before the LCK finals, that HLE would be going, super deep into a series with Bilibili Gaming, that they would be in contention for being the best team in the world, and that they would be a couple of plays away from, winning a series against BLG and, moving on and potentially making it to World Finals, man, that'd be a pretty good outcome for an org that has really struggled over the past few years. This is still an amazing accomplishment for HLE, and I swear, I really want to make this point as abundantly clear as I can possibly make it. If I hear a single person talk about, oh, Peanut choking again in the quarterfinals, oh, Peanut underperforming at Worlds, I might genuinely have to start like going on angry rants in comment sections, on these videos or on Twitter or whatever, because I just can't handle it. I just can't handle it. Peanut played about as perfect of a Poppy game here in game number 4 as you could possibly play. It just wasn't enough. I mean, genuinely, what else could you ask him to do? Go watch that big fight around, what was it, like 5th Dragon or something? Where Peanut perfectly times his W in order to stop the Kaisa entry and then immediately zones out the Rakan, and they're able to pick him off. Like, it's perfect stuff. Like, you can't possibly play this champion better, and this was such a pivotal moment. It just wasn't enough. Bilibili was near perfect in this game. You can also talk about Viper. I was critical of his game number 3, rightfully so. I don't think he played well. Boy, did he bounce back here in game number 4. This misfortune was absolutely ginormous. Zeka had some really game-breaking moments, but also some back-breaking mental errors, just getting himself caught out and giving over bounties when he doesn't need to. People are going to sit here and yell at Doran and scapegoat Doran, and I get it. Games 2 and 3, go ahead and do that. He wasn't very good in those games. Some of the Gnar engages in this game were game-winning, like were fight-winning coming in from him. His timing and his ability to play the front line was near perfect through a lot of this game. There's almost nothing to criticize him for, which is why he's not getting my dud of the game. You have Delight, who had a couple of fantastic ultimates on the rel. Like, there's just nothing nothing else to say. Yes, there were mistakes from HLE, but there were from BLG as well, and really at the end of the day, it just came down to who the best player on the Rift was, and that happened to be Elk on the Kai'Sa, and you just have to live with that if you're HLE. To me, I'm walking away from this as any player on HLE and HLE fans saying, yeah, we proved that we were one of the best teams in the world. This could have been a finals matchup. And BLG, shitting the bed in the Swiss stage and randomly losing to LNG unfortunately led to HLE having to pay the consequences, and it is what it is. I think this team has to be proud of themselves. This was a fantastic year. They are LCK champions domestically. You can never take that away from them, and obviously that is a crazy good accomplishment, and even at Worlds, they were incredibly good. They just couldn't get past one of the titans of the League of Legends world, and it is what it is. I don't want to hear anything about how this team or any of these players underperformed, because this was a legendary series. And then for Bilibili, they were the winners of the legendary series. They move on to take on Weibo Gaming. We'll talk about that in just a second, moving on to the bracket stage. But if you ever needed confirmation that this team was going to be fine moving into the best of fives, that you didn't have to worry too much about the Swiss stage, that they were going to understand their role, this is as loud and clear of a statement that they are still a huge favorite to win this tournament as you could ever get. Alright, but that is going to do it for my Worlds Quarterfinals Day number 2 overview and analysis video, and man, what a day, what a series it was. BLG is going to be moving on. They take on Weibo Gaming in the semifinals. It's a rematch of the semifinals last year, and last year Bilibili were also favorites going into that series, and Weibo was able to upset them. Obviously, I'm not going to give full predictions here or go into a full breakdown, because we'll get into that once we start talking about the semifinals in general, but this is a very different Bilibili Gaming team than what we had last year. I do also think this is a better Weibo Gaming team than what we had last year as well, though, so we'll see what ends up happening. I think after this series, BLG is going to be favorites against basically anybody that they go into. This was about as perfect of a showing as you could give, but tomorrow, hopefully we can follow it up. T1 and Top Esports have their work cut out for them, but, it should be an interesting one. I think this was the second most interesting series of the quarterfinals here on day number 3. As you guys know, I kind of gave this a bit of a 50-50, a toss-up. Top Esports has been better than T1 across this tournament, and generally they've been better across this year in total, but you never really know when it comes to T1. It seems like they always figure things out, especially as you head into the quarterfinals. This is a part of the tournament that they've very rarely ended up struggling in. They have pretty consistently been the best team ever at qualifying out of the quarterfinals, and so you can never really count them out, and Top Esports is certainly not the most consistent team in the world. Faker versus Cream is certainly going to be a matchup that you are going to have to watch. If one of those players ends up really underperforming, that's going to be a big problem for their team, but it's just hard to predict, right? Because, Top Esports beat them already at Worlds, and because of that, I'm going to go 55-45 in favor of Top Esports. If T1 wins tomorrow, I'm not going to be shocked. I don't think anybody is going to be shocked, and I certainly don't think T1 fans are going to be shocked, but I think Top Esports have to be considered favorites, at least until proven otherwise. So far, so good at this tournament. Everything that we were kind of hoping to see out of TES has happened so far. They've been the team that we kind of hoped and prayed that they would be, and I'm going to hope and pray that that will continue into the quarterfinals and that they will be able to qualify for the semis. But let me know if you agree or disagree down in the comment section below, and let me know what you thought of the series, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we'll be covering the rest of the tournament. Hopefully, it's half as fun as today was in terms of the games that we get, but if you're interested in my coverage of the rest of the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the finals, and then the off-season, of course, coming up right after, hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified when all of those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all